What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the 10-7 MMA Show. My name is Huzaifa, and I am the fam. We are waiting for Justin Guitar Hero James, the professional fighter. He will be jumping on shortly, but until he jumps on, we are going to start with some news that has been coming down. There's been a lot of interesting news stories and news pieces, not a lot of big fights in the near future. We do have UFC Noche that's coming up pretty soon. We've talked about that card. That card is going to be phenomenal. Now, one of the things that I always talk about in terms of the general excitement level over a fight, obviously we have fight styles, we have the battle that's going to ensue, but a big portion of it is stakes. What's at stake for these major title fights? What's at stake at UFC Noche for the main event when we have Sean O'Malley versus Merab? I believe this is one of the most exciting fights of the year because the stakes are incredibly high. Sean O'Malley has already beaten Aljamain Sterling. That was a matchup that a lot of people predicted that he would lose and lose pretty emphatically. Instead, he came out and had a tremendous knockout in the first or second round. I can't remember. I think it was second round. It was an amazing performance. Showed that sniper-like precision, and that was it. That's all she wrote. Now, people were saying that maybe Sean O'Malley was ducking Merab. Again, another seemingly difficult challenge, difficult style matchup. And if he can pull this off, this is going to be huge. And I think a lot of people are starting to believe that Sean O'Malley will pull this off. I haven't checked the odds lately, but it is a fight where people are starting to favor Sean O'Malley, I think, for a number of reasons, but one of which is just he's just such an incredible striker. That precision striking, especially when he has the range, he has the height, he has a lot of things going in his favor. I think he can pull this off, and if he does pull this off, this will be tremendous. This will really start to set the stage that Sean O'Malley is one of the greatest fighters of all time. So huge stakes, and then basically the oyster, the world will be his oyster if he does pull this off. Who can he fight? He can fight potentially Ilia Topuria. Maybe he's going to move up. Maybe he's going to, continue smashing more bantamweights. I think Umar Nurmagomedov might be the next challenge. That's going to be a tough one. But then after that, if he surpasses that, that will be insane. So a lot of cool stuff coming up for UFC Noche. Okay, let's move on to topic number one, which is Dana White gets major heat about Jon Jones. So I made a quick video about this yesterday, talking about the last press conference at Dana White's Contender Series and the stuff that people were saying, basically harassing Dana White about his constant stream of laudatory comments toward Jon Jones, saying he's not only the GOAT, but the pound for pound greatest fighter. And we talk about pound for pound. We come back to the discussion of what is pound for pound. It's meant to apply only to active fighters. That's why we don't see GSP or Khabib or other fighters like that on the pound for pound list. It's about active fighters. Okay. So Dana White has been getting a lot of blowback lately when he's been basically propping Jon Jones up. But what really happened, what's up, Salim? What really happened, a major occurrence in the last DWCS press conference was Kevin Iole in particular, also with John Morgan and some other journalists. They actually really pressed Dana White about his comments regarding Jon Jones. And this was pretty interesting because I think most of the journalists that attend these press conferences are essentially like after fight pressers. I think they're a little bit afraid or intimidated by Dana White to steer clear of some of these harder hitting questions, these tougher questions. I think they don't like to ask them because Dana White gets irritated. And we've seen Dana White in the past scold reporters. It seems like he might have kicked reporters out as well when they ask questions that he doesn't like. So there's a lot on the line, yet Kevin Iole, with a longstanding relationship with Dana White, went in there and really grilled him about Jon Jones, basically disagreeing with him about placing Jon Jones as the pound for pound greatest right now because of inactivity, not because of the resume, right? Nobody's disagreeing that with Dana White's position that Jon Jones is the GOAT, but a lot of people were disagreeing and calling him out about this pound for pound ranking. So I want to talk about that real quick. And again, I did touch on it in the video yesterday. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But here's the thing, okay? We're talking about inactivity and everybody's getting so mad. Let's break it down, because we want to be careful about objective measures versus subjective measures. When we talk about pound for pound, yes, activity comes into play. But there is no definitive timeline where somebody can be removed from the pound for pound. It's subjective. Could it be 6 months of inactivity? Maybe. Could it be a year? Could it be a year and a half? Kevin Iole at the presser said, yeah, usually after a year of inactivity, people are typically removed or traditionally removed from the pound for pound list. Now, I haven't looked at the data and determined whether or not this is accurate, but this is a Kevin. I always feel he's obviously a journalist in this field, a longstanding one, and he is an expert. So maybe that there is something to that. But once again, we go back to this idea that is a subjective claim, that is a subjective measure, a year and a half, 2 years of inactivity. Moreover, Jon Jones got injured. So maybe it makes sense logically for us to say, hey, you're injured. You're not scheduled to fight till November, and that fight hasn't even been officially scheduled yet or announced yet. But everybody knows Jon Jones is probably fighting Stipe in November. So you might say, all right, well, it hasn't been announced. He had an injury. He hasn't fought since March of 2023. So we're coming up to a year and a half now. Maybe we need to pull him from the pound for pound. Fine, maybe. But it's not definitive. So once again, if people want to say going forward, maybe we need to have an objective measure. After a year of no fights, you need to be pulled from the pound for pound, but then you can be reinstated back in. Fine. But that hasn't been said. Now, let's talk about why people are really getting upset. I think people are really getting upset here for a combination of reasons. But the main thing is, we've never I don't know, at least me, we've never really seen Dana White get somebody's back to this extent. And then I think there's been a lot of commotion about Tom Aspinall, especially from guys like MMA Guru, who are big supporters of Tom Aspinall, big haters of Jon Jones. That's also stirring up the public, saying we want Tom Aspinall to fight, all this stuff. All right, so let me give you my perspective here. I think the hate against Jon Jones saying he's ducking Tom Aspinall is completely unwarranted. He was offered a fight by the UFC, just like any other fighter. He's taken what's given to him. Done. Number two, I think the Stipe fight makes a lot of sense because, again, Jon Jones is going for legacy. He's trying to do things that nobody else has done in the sport. It makes sense to me that he would want to fight Stipe, considering that he is considered to be the greatest heavyweight of all time. It makes a lot more sense than to fight Tom Aspinall, who might one day be the greatest heavyweight of all time. A lot of people are saying he will be, but he's still technically on the rise. He's still on the come up. You know, I don't see why it's so important for Jon Jones, somebody who's near the end of his career, 37, going on 38, has to fight this up-and-coming beast. Why does he have to do that? Has he not done enough? And then if there's somebody after Tom Aspinall, would you say he has got to fight Pavlovich or somebody else on the? I just don't see why. And most of the time we get so upset the way the UFC treats fighters as they age out, throwing them to the young, hungry lions as their kind of powers are diminishing. We want to feed the young up-and-comers and maybe bolster their resumes with an amazing vet, right? People don't like that. People don't like the way that maybe Nate Diaz was thrown to the wolves against Khamzat Chimaev. Granted, the fight never happened, but people get upset by that. Now Dana White's actually not doing that. He seems to be protecting Jon Jones, but now people are getting upset about that. So I just feel like you got to choose one or the other. And I think this is a case of just people finding negativity wherever they can, finding something to be upset about. Instead, if we take a step back, saying once and for all, Dana White is maybe trying to protect and trying to bolster, lift somebody up who has done so much for the sport, who's been around in the UFC since 2008. Don't forget, okay? 16 years in the UFC. And I think that I think you can disagree with Dana White, but I don't think there's any reason to rake him over the coals and say what he's saying is totally outlandish. Now, why is he saying why he's going to this extreme level to bolster a fighter, which he normally never does? That's another question. Now we get into the quote unquote conspiracy element, or really the branding and the marketing in the UFC. So I made another video talking about this whole conspiracy theory and why Dana White is going out on such a limb to protect Jon Jones. It's again to protect, in my opinion, the legacy of the UFC, to say that the UFC has the greatest fighters in the world. The problem right now is I think the one unanswered question is Francis Ngannou better than Jon Jones? Is he currently the greatest heavyweight of all time? And if so, this might be the first time in the history of mixed martial arts, or for a long time, where the greatest heavyweight fighter is not in the UFC. He's an active fighter in another organization. I think that's potentially a problem for the UFC branding and marketing. That's why he wants Jon Jones to go out, cement his legacy, and be unanimously considered the greatest fighter of all time, the pound for pound #1 greatest active fighter as well. Somebody who beat Stipe handily, where Stipe, yeah, fine, Francis beat Stipe, but Stipe beat Francis initially, right? So now we can come full circle and we can say Jon Jones, baddest man of all time, greatest fighter of all time, UFC fighter, born, bred, started his career here, ended his career here. Boom, UFC is cemented. I think that's what this is all about. I think some people are aware of that. That's why some people are jumping on Dana White. But hey, I don't, like I said, have a huge problem with it. We know that Dana White spins things to protect the company. This is another case of that. That's it. Let's leave it alone. Now, finally, coming back to my last point, and we're going to circle back to John Jones at the end of the show. Hopefully Justin will be on by then, and we can talk about Francis Ngannou versus John Jones. Who would win that right now? That's an interesting question. I'm pretty sure I know what Justin would say, but that'll just be a fun question to answer. But I'll end with this, and I'm probably going to, be on this hill by myself again. I don't care to see John Jones fight Tom Aspinall. I don't see it as a big deal. There's always going to be somebody else. I think people are pushing this fight so much, maybe because Tom Aspinall is very beloved, and John Jones is getting a lot of hate right now. So people are jumping on the Tom Aspinall bandwagon and maybe want to see John Jones lose. I don't know. Whatever it is, if you just look at it objectively as a fighter who's got this tremendous legacy, I just don't see why we'd be so adamant that he must fight this up and comer. And if he doesn't, it's just the biggest shame. I mean, GSP never came back and fought Khabib. We talked about it, but are people going after GSP's legacy and saying he ducked Khabib? No, the fight just never came together, and it is what it is. And it doesn't mean anything negative, in my opinion, about GSP. They couldn't make it. He didn't. He was entertaining it, but didn't happen. That's it. We move on. So that's my 2 cents. Okay. Now we're moving on to topic number 2. Shavkat claims Belal turned down the title fight in October. And I think this actually has been confirmed. So I thought this was just an interesting wrinkle in Belal's legacy. Now, do I think this is a big deal? No, not at all. October turnaround. We just had the fight in July. So that would be August will be 1 month, September 2 months, October 3 months. It's a very short turnaround. I don't know the exact date in October that they were trying to target for this fight, but it's about a 3-month turnaround. That's pretty short. We've had other fighters that the UFC has wanted to do a short turnaround like that. I think Aljamain turned around in 2 or 3 months to fight Sean O'Malley. I know that they asked Dricus to turn around and fight Izzy within that time. I think that was right? Yeah, to fight Izzy after he beat Robert Whittaker, and he turned it down. Then we had the Sean Strickland fight. Sean Strickland beat Izzy, etc. So the UFC has done this, and it usually does kind of seem like the guy that they're asking for the short turnaround, maybe they're not really so excited about them being champion, right? Shavkat isn't having to do a quick turnaround. He had a fight a while ago against Wonder Boy, came out victorious. Belal had a 5-round battle against Leon Edwards. So was he in the right to turn this down? I think he was totally in the right to turn it down. But does it also kind of indicate that maybe the UFC wants Shavkat to be the champion? I think it does. They'll probably deny that tooth and nail, or fight that tooth and nail to say that that's not the case. They don't care who wins, right? But we do know that it does seem UFC has certain favorites that they want to be championships because, again, it's a business. They want a champion that is easy to promote. Do I think that Belal cannot be promoted? I'm actually changing my tune about that. I actually am starting to come around big time about Belal. If you listen to what he says and what he talks about, the image that he presents, the way he talks about being a good role model for the kids, he's not flashy. He's actually a pretty honest guy. One of the issues that I had with him is I felt like he wasn't being very honest. This guy's scared of me. Like, what are you talking about? This is going to be an easy fight. What are you talking about? My boxing is like Canelo, like all these ludicrous things. But then he proved them right. He actually outstruck Leon Edwards, which was insane. He did have a big fan base in the UK, which I thought he was just talking nonsense. So I think Belal is a very promotable fighter, and hopefully the UFC comes around to him. And this is going to be a really good fight. Shavkat himself said that Belal is his toughest challenge right now in the welterweight division, that Belal is looking fresh, looking sharp, looking better than ever. So, yeah, Belal's in his prime right now. Let's see what happens. Would it be incredible to see Shavkat as a champion? I think it would be whenever this fight does take place. But it's a fun one. It's going to be a fun one, and we'll see where the cards fall and how it turns out. If Belal beats Shavkat, though, holy smokes, that will be incredible. And then it'd be very interesting, too, if Belal wins, then who's Shavkat going to fight next? Because I think Shavkat will stay undefeated outside of Belal. If he loses to Belal, I think he'll keep smashing everybody. So that would be a crazy win. Let's see what happens. Okay, moving on to the next piece of news. Caio Borralho, in a recent interview on Submission Radio, apparently says he wants to fight Izzy next. He also talks a lot about Khamzat, my favorite fighter, Khamzat Chimaev, who's scheduled to fight Robert Whittaker coming up at that Abu Dhabi card. So first, I want to talk about what he said about Khamzat. which was very interesting. So Caio Borralho, if I'm pronouncing that right. First of all, super cool fighter. You should definitely check him out if you haven't yet. Listen to his interviews. He's awesome. But he's a longtime training partner with Khamzat. He himself said that he believes Khamzat will beat Robert Whittaker. Now, there's always that question of biasy, right? You biases. You train with somebody, you're going to get their back, you're going to promote them, fine. But he's not such good friends with them where he's like, I'll never fight him. He said himself, he's willing to fight Khamzat, and he thinks one day they will fight, and it will be a great fight. So I thought that was interesting insight, talking about the toughness. Oh, he also said, too, he's never seen anybody that trains like Khamzat. And he just says that Khamzat, for whatever reason, he does things that are basically insane. He'll go spar for 5 rounds, then he'll do an extra 3 rounds more than anybody else. Then he'll go run 30 minutes after that and do sprints, and then he'll come back and lift weights. We've heard this before, and even Caio said this could be possibly why Khamzat constantly gets sick, because he quote-unquote overtrains. Now, I don't know anything about overtraining or what that would look like, and I'm sure Khamzat's team has him dialed in pretty effectively. But what we can definitively say is Khamzat is a super hard worker. He's always in there pushing himself to the max. That's got to be the recipe for championship material, double champ, maybe even triple champ material. So I'm going to still stick by my guns where I said before that I think Khamzat might turn out to be the greatest fighter of all time. But anyways, let's come back to Caio and his next fight, and he wants to fight Izzy. I think that would be actually a tremendous fight. I don't know who else Izzy might fight coming up next. I think people have talked about him. Who else? I looked at the rankings before. I don't know who else we've really talked about for Izzy to fight, but I think Caio coming up as a prospect would be amazing for Izzy. And if Izzy does get the win, maybe he gets thrown right back into a title shot, right? Fighting somebody who had a tremendous performance. Caio, if you remember, just came off an amazing win against Jared Cannonier, who Caio said is the hardest hitting middleweight that he's ever felt. So I think other people would agree with that. He's got one heck of a, very, very strong striking. So yeah, let's see what happens with that fight. I think they could be very cool. All right. Moving on to the next news item. Dan Hooker proposes an interim title fight against Arman Tsarukyan. Okay. So let's talk about where this is coming from. So first of all, Arman is supposed to be getting the title fight against Islam Makhachev, of course. Now, somebody, I think it was Tauran, said on our last stream that Islam against Tsarukyan was being talked about for December. Let me just see this real quick. I want to see if there's any news on that. Islam versus Tsarukyan. So I want to see what's going on here. Yeah, that's the old fight back in 2019. All right, let me just look at the news items. After his 9... Okay, so Arman Tsarukyan after his 9-month ban. I don't know what's going on with this. Okay, so Tauran, I know you said that. I haven't seen any news about that. Last thing I heard was that Islam's injury will not be healed until into 2025. So Dan Hooker, fresh off an amazing win, is now proposing that they do an interim title fight against, Dan Hooker versus Tsarukyan until Islam is healed up. Let me see when Tsarukyan's ban is lifted. Because also, do you guys remember why Arman Tsarukyan got a ban? Because he attacked a fan during his walkout. A fan was like, talking smack to him, and he went out after him and attacked him. He got a 9-month suspension. I don't know if it got reduced. Here, let me see this. So we're going to share this article with you guys. So it says Arman Tsarukyan suspended for 9 months after striking a fan during UFC 300 walkout. He was supposed to challenge Islam through a punch at a fan. So that would be 9 months from April. So somewhere at the beginning of 2025. Again, theoretically, we could have the title fight then, but I think the main issue is that we don't know if Islam is going to be back from his injury. So it sounds like not. So in the meantime, we get of Dan Hooker fighting Tsarukyan for an interim title shot. I actually don't think that's a terrible idea, right? Like, who else would it be if you're going to do an interim title shot? I guess you could maybe say Justin Gaethje would be another option. I don't think you can really say Dustin Poirier anymore, just because he just came off a loss. I don't think it would totally make sense. Maybe you could, though. Maybe you could argue that. Maybe we could throw Charles Oliveira, somebody like that, in the mix as well. But I actually think this is kind of interesting, and Dan Hooker's not afraid to fight anybody. That's a tough matchup for him. I'd love to see it. I want to see Dan Hooker really get back in the mix and see what he can do and maybe get back up to the mountaintop. I have a rematch against Islam. That'd be amazing. Okay. All right. We're going to go to our last topic today. Unfortunately, it looks like we're not going to get Justin's feedback and takes on a lot of these. This one, though, is actually fine without Justin's take because I'm pretty sure what I know what he would have said, which is that, of course, we're talking about Francis versus John Jones. Francis would beat John Jones, right? Oh, hold on. We got some audio playing. What is going on? I think some ad was playing. My bad. But anyways, I know Justin would say Francis would smoke John Jones, right? He trains with him. He's got that knockout power. He's a big guy, and that would go in his favor of basically stopping the takedowns, etc. I don't know. I think this is a very interesting question. Unfortunately, a question that will never be answered. But once again, it's a very fascinating question because it gets back to the heart of why Dana White is being so laudatory towards John Jones, saying he's the baddest man. He'll walk out of any room. You put him in there with anybody, he's going to be the one that walks out alive. He's the baddest man on the planet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all comes down to Francis Ngannou. And I think whether or not we could say one way or the other, I think the fact of the matter is that this is a great question. People will go on either side of the fence. I don't think we know the answer. And this is why Dana White is protecting John Jones as much as he is. This is why Dana White goes out to push this fight against Stipe, because this will cement John Jones' legacy. And without them actually having to fight, it'll allow him to say, yeah, John Jones would clearly beaten Francis, keeps everything good, and order will be retained in the UFC, saying that UFC has the best fighters on the planet. So that's what I think is going on here. I don't really know who would win between Francis and John Jones, but again, this is why everything is going down the way that it is. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's it for the show today. Once again, if you guys did join along and you did enjoy the show, make sure to click that like button. Again, so sorry that Justin wasn't able to join. Maybe some of you guys jumped off because we didn't get that expert opinion, expert feedback, but he ended up having a training session today at this time, so he wasn't able to make it. But I will be here again next Friday and on Monday for our Monday show as well. Make sure to catch us at 1:30 p.m. PST. We might have to make a slight adjustment to our Monday time change for the month of September, but I'll keep you guys posted on that front. But anyways, thank you guys so much for joining, and I will see you in the next video. Take it easy.